recording there. We're all set. I do feel special. Fucking, no, I don't. I just feel like I should record this as many ways as I can. Because some people aren't aware of the podcast. But, yeah, that's why I'm filming it today, man. I need to do a podcast anyhow. Had an awesome one last week with Ben Saunders and Jeremiah Vance. That one was cool. If you haven't heard any podcasts, I'd go back to that one. Both great guys, both awesome martial artists. And so it was just cool hanging out with them, being around them. Sorry if I don't respond to the Facebook stuff. I easily lose my train of thought all the time, so I'm just gonna go. Hopefully I sound okay. Hopefully it's pointing in the right fucking direction. But I kind of want to talk about a couple things. One is social media, but we'll get into that because I don't want to fucking seem like I'm preaching. I'm going to be talking about myself and my own issues with it. But no, man, it was a good week. The kids were off of school, so we got to do a lot of stuff. We went up to Wrightwood, enjoyed the mountains for 2 days, which was plenty. Kids got to play in the snow. I played along with them. We went with some good friends, and it was cool. Everyone had a lot of fun. Except for Jake melting down and losing his shit a couple times. But that's to be expected. He's 3, just about to be 4. Another cool thing this week was I busted out all my old CDs, all my old metal, because my daughter likes Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, all kinds of other metal stuff. I don't let her listen to too much stuff. Like, she doesn't listen to the harder music, and mainly because I don't anymore either. And I realized just that it definitely affected me then, and it still affects me now. Like, if I'm going to go to do yoga, I can't be listening to Slayer or anything like that. Like, I'll get amped up too much. So I'm monitoring what she's watching, but we're able to go through all of my old discs, and it was just bringing up a lot of memories. Like, my very first CD was Slayer, South of Heaven. I saw that, and just all the different memories that go with it. And just also thinking about the crazy shit I was listening to and just how destructive I was and all that kind of stuff and all the shit that hopefully neither of those kids will go into. That's one of my biggest missions in life, is making sure my kids don't come out as fucked up as me. I was like, if I could do that, like, I'm blessed. Or my kids are, I think they're awesome. Of course they have flaws. But I don't care about intelligence. I don't care about scores. I don't care about any of that. I was like, but if they love themselves and they're happy, I was like, then I did a good job. Because yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why I went with metal. But it was cool. Livy got to find some new Iron Maiden songs I hadn't downloaded. We're going through all that. It's cool seeing her being at that age where she could appreciate that. And that kind of led to another thing, which is the latest story I finished. I just got some feedback on it. Usually when I write a story, I'm not sure how it's going to be. Like, I'll feel good about it. I'll get excited. I'll write it, and then I'll send it to an editor. They'll give me some notes. We'll make it better. And then, but in my head, I'm still like, my shit sucks. Like, I'm never that good. I'm not, I was like, there's got to be something. I was like, something needs to be better. It needs to be perfect. But then I already told Olivia some of the story, thinking that it was too adult for her. But it's based off of an MMA story. It's kind of like present day. It gets a little bit violent. So today, her mom let her read it. So she was reading at the gym, and man, she just got so into it. And the main character is like a 15-year-old female, and the whole story is about a fight that takes place, a legal fight. And Liv was reading it and just loving it, and then she saw that there were no more pages, or I was still editing the rest of it, and so she was disappointed. And then Bailey, who's a couple years older, she picked it up and started reading it, and there was some bad language, well, inappropriate language, but we talked about that too. She's already seen those words, she's already hearing those words. I mean, I was cussing like crazy. My parents would not allow me to cuss. Hopefully you're not watching, Mom. I don't know if you're there. But no, we weren't allowed to cuss. But I think from the age of 5, I was saying fuck like every other word when they weren't around. So I mean, by talking to the kids about that, we're taking away that power. It's like, no, they could be powerful words, and here you go. Let me add them to your arsenal. This is what they mean. This is when you could use them. It's like, I'm not going to use these words around grandma. I'm not going to use them at school. I'm not going to use them. Like, if I do use them, then this is how someone will judge me, or this is how someone might see me if I choose to use these words in these settings. I was like, but if you just chopped off your finger, I was like, yeah, you're probably going to scream, oh, fuck, or, or something like that. I said, and that's what I try to capture in my writing. is just making it, it depends on who the character is, what the situation is, on what kind of language they would use. Um, but I really, even though that's in my head, I probably put way too much cussing in. I think on Brightside, there were it was like 100 and something fucks, which was originally probably like 200 fucks. And I think we narrowed it down to like 60 or so. So yeah, I'm getting better at cutting out the fucks. Um, but what else? What else? What else? But yeah, that was encouraging to see them both really dig the story. And then they were at lunch. I stayed and trained with Nancy and Jessica. We had some cool ass rolls. I was trying to do it with my eyes closed, getting ready for competition next week. And then I met the girls. They were having lunch, and I had the last 4 pages of the story, and I just read it to them, and they just were eating it up. And it was cool to see their reactions. Like, my target audience for this story isn't an 8-year-old girl, and I probably seem awful for reading it to her. But no, and if they're already reading Divergent and Hunger Games and all that kind of stuff, like, this is nothing. But it is a cool story, and I figured originally I was going to give it away for free, try to figure out a way to attach it to Unlocking the Cage for people that pre-order, but that's complicated, so it probably won't happen. But what I am thinking is I have 3 or 4 other short stories I just came up with this year, and then I might fix up a couple other ones that were published before, but I'll clean them up, make them decent, and probably put that out within a month or two. So we'll have that coming out. And then there's going to be Unlocking the Cage. I still need to get some final edits from people, just okays on their parts. I want to make sure I catch all the errors. I've already talked with a lot of fighters. And then because so many fighters aren't going to be, I wasn't able to mention all the fighters in the book because I interviewed way too many and shit, I lost footage and everything else. But I still want to mention all those people. I don't want to just put their name down. So I need to send out the letters to these guys and try to get them. I want them to, everyone could have at least a paragraph or two to, try to say who they are or why they fight. Because everyone that I interviewed, man, it may not have been a long time that we talked or who knows. But whether or not they made it into the book, they all were definitely a big part of my whole journey, and I appreciate it. So thank you guys for helping me out. You probably don't understand how much that did help, especially the guys at the start. But yeah, what else? There was something else, but I always forget my shit, and that's without even reading anything. Fucking terrible. But you know what? It's been another thing I haven't really mentioned is again, my favorite subject. Losing weight. We're finally getting smaller. I finally am okay getting rid of, I no longer need to be the big strong guy. I think for the last I don't know, man, as long as I can remember, I always needed to be big and strong and made me feel tough and safe or whatever else, or like a real man. And I know several other of my friends feel the same way. But even once I realized that weight wasn't helping me and that was just a false sense of security, that I should lose the weight for getting healthier, the weight never came off. I would try all the time, just never came off. But then once I decided, you know what, I'm going to eat a little bit healthier. I just want to get healthier for me, and I want to get better at yoga. I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. Like, the weights come off. And so now it's going to be cool. I'm going to be fighting at 205. So, which is nice. That's I'm lighter than I was in high school. I think high school I got up to 215. I busted my ass lifting weights all the time, protein powder all the time, and from that point on I got up to 275. But now I'm down to 208, my walking weight, and I can now compete at 205, which is cool. I no longer have to get smashed by fucking giants. Now I just get run over by 205 pounders. But this weekend, I am going to be competing at Subfighter BJJ. They have a no-gi. I think hopefully it's submission only. That's the reason I'm doing it. And Anthony's going to do it as well. We'll probably have a podcast live from there. Hopefully in between matches or after I win the whole thing. There aren't any age brackets, so I'm going against all these young guys, and I'm in the hardest division. But the good thing is, that's what I'm happy about. It's I don't give a fuck if I win or lose. I'm winning because I'm even just able to train. when I can go and train and roll for 30 minutes with guys, like, that's a fucking win. If I go to a competition and I win a match, then that's amazing. But just the fact is, like, okay, getting over this fear, and I haven't completely gone rid of it at all. I don't compete enough. But it's just going into that uncomfortable area and just saying fuck it and just doing it, win or lose. So, but I'm planning on winning. We'll see. Anthony's going in too. I was talking all kinds of shit to him. He's my main training partner. He hasn't been able to be on the podcast lately because he is now in school. And so we don't see each other enough, but we do train every Tuesday and Thursday, and we go hard. And so I was talking all kinds of shit, and I told him if he wanted to, he could go into the intermediate because it's 1 to 6 years, and he might be at that, and he may not want to go against me. There aren't any heel hooks, I think. If there aren't any heel hooks, I feel pretty good. If there are heel hooks, I'm fucked. But I'm trying to work on that. But the most important thing with jiu-jitsu, man, is just what it's done for the family, what it's done for me. It's definitely helped me out a ton. I encourage everybody. It can be tough at times. I was telling one of the females I was training with today, I was like, a year ago or maybe 6 months ago, I was like, I didn't know if I would do jiu-jitsu anymore. I wasn't sure where I was going to go between jiu-jitsu or yoga, and I was getting so beat up. But now it's like, man, I'm enjoying it so much, and just being able to show people little things, and then being able to learn so much by other people. When I went to Jeremiah's class, it was under an hour, and I picked up so much. And then I in turn can go back and I could pass it on to my wife, or she could pass stuff on to me. She's actually teaching me stuff now because she's so good. Now she is really good. But then also my daughter, and so she's been helping me out too. So it's been cool. But it was the reason I even wanted to get on here was about social media. Because I post pictures all the time, and whenever I do, part of me hates the social media game, but the other part of me is playing like a motherfucker. And I should even be I realize, well, on the business end of it, I was like, yeah, I need to be doing this stuff. This is how I rationalize it. If I want people to know about the podcast, I need to put out pictures. If I want to share if I want to share yoga with people, then that's important to put out stuff about that. I need to put out those pictures. I want to talk about in the drug war, and that everyone should be able to smoke cannabis, and that the government should never control us at all. Then I should post pictures of that. And so that's how I rationalize it. But I was thinking, every time I do that, I'm just so you're just pulled from the moment. And it's cool to capture, we were up in the mountains and we were capturing pictures of the kids playing, and just capturing those moments, and it's awesome. But when I'm sitting down and I'm by myself and I'm thinking about the yoga session and wanting to get a good picture and where I should put the camera, and maybe I'm even going to pause and stop and fucking take a picture, that's pulling me out of it. And even sometimes, and it doesn't even have to be the phone. Sometimes it's my editing. I want to do that instead. But whatever the distraction is, it's definitely pulling us from that moment. And it's hard to do. I'm often tempted to say, fuck it. It's like, why do I really need it? I say I need it for a business. I was like, maybe. I do want to be, I want to become a best-selling author, or I have all these goals. I mean, I don't know. I don't even really care about all that stuff. Hopefully all that stuff is going to come. I want to write. I want to create. I'm having fun doing that. I think because of that, because I'm enjoying it so much, I think good stuff's going to happen. I think these new Try Not to Dies that I'm doing with all these friends, I think those are going to be incredible. I have a new level of confidence. And yeah, I just see, if I was an outsider looking in, I think I would see myself doing pretty well. But now that I'm in that position, honestly, I don't give a fuck. I was like, if I gotta take off a week and play with the kids, I was like, then that's cool. Well, whatever the situation is, that's what it is. But with the social media thing, it's cool. It's a great connection. I just don't like the part of me that is looking at my phone to see reactions, to see how many likes I got, to see what else is going on. If I were to, and this is just me. This is me not trying to cast judgment. This is me saying this is what I do. Fuck, man. If I add up how many minutes, I don't even want to do it because I'm afraid to see what the number would be, but how many minutes am I looking at my phone, or just checking my phone, or scrolling through some bullshit feeds, and kind of seeing what other people are doing. I understand it's just a huge fucking distraction, man. It's a distraction from what we're doing. And in that hour of time or 30 minutes or whatever, it was like I could have been doing something productive. But instead, I'm gonna take some more pictures of me fucking trying to be cool and all that. So nothing's gonna change. I knew that. I knew that before I started the conversation. I was like, I'm not gonna break off from social media. I'm not gonna deny that. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm fucking narcissist. We kind of all are. We've definitely turned into that. That's kind of where we're at. And oh well, fuck it. What else? What fiction are we gonna do today? Oh, we always end with a short story. Twisted Reunion is back there, and I don't feel like getting up. So this might be a surprise. I think last week we did No One's Here. Real short one. So this one, since this one is a shorter podcast, we'll go with a long story. Maybe Book of Revelation if we have not done that one. I don't know if we've done that one recently. I was thinking about that because the artist, that's actually not true. But I think we're going to stick with that story anyhow. It's a cool one. It's about Stephen King, my favorite author. All right, thank you guys for watching and listening. Yeah, probably didn't get anything out of it, but thank you anyhow. All right, later.
Book of Revelation. Professor John Warrington stood in the middle of the driveway, an 8-foot-high gate towering before him. To his right was an intercom console. Its red button had faded considerably since he'd last been to this house more than 5 years ago. That was a day he would never forget, no matter how hard he tried. Not yet ready to announce himself, not sure if he'd ever be, and thinking that maybe it would be best if he'd just turn around and go home, John tried to peer through the wrought iron gate to glimpse what awaited him. But the once immaculate gate was now an impenetrable wall of ivy and brambles. The only metal showing was the sharp, rusted points that begged for blood, taunting the foolish to climb over them, hoping they'd slip and impale themselves on the menacing spikes. John wondered again what he was doing here, why he had agreed to the old man's invitation. They hadn't spoken since that day 5 years ago when Hazelwood, John's former professor, mentor, and friend, had let John know exactly what he thought of him. Not only had Hazelwood kicked John out of his house and his life, but he'd threatened John with far worse. The old man had been 70 years old then, and appeared physically incapable of carrying out the vengeance he'd threatened. But his words still echoed in John's mind. People change, John told himself. They get older. They calmed down. They realized they had jumped to conclusions and overreacted. Hazelwood had probably decided to forgive John and didn't want to take his grudge to the grave. At least that's what John tried to believe. The old man's threats replayed in his mind as John glanced over his shoulder to the car he'd left at the bottom of the winding driveway. He should be at home, sitting next to the phone. Even though he had his cell phone with him and the police had promised they would alert him immediately if there were any new developments, it didn't feel right to be away from home while Susan was missing. She'd been gone since January. John had come home one afternoon to find their front door wide open. There was one suitcase missing and some of her clothes, but John had never believed she'd packed it herself. There hadn't been a note, and Susan would never have walked out without saying goodbye. She was many things, but she was not someone who just ran. John rarely left his house since she'd vanished. He'd done nothing but pace the halls of their home, barely eating, sleeping less than a few hours at a time. The police, along with his friends and family, had encouraged John to go on living his life as best he could. They said sitting at home wouldn't bring Susan home any faster, and the last 2 months had proved their case. He knew that everyone believed Susan had left him. She was half John's age, gorgeous, and intelligent. But Susan loved him. Of that much John was certain. They were going to be married in the fall. Hazelwood's invitation was the first John had considered since Susan disappeared. His old mentor had sounded so excited on the phone that John had agreed immediately, despite his better judgment. Truthfully, John needed the distraction. There was still the nagging feeling that this wasn't a good idea. But John was out of the house now, and if he didn't go through with the visit, he would never find out what Hazelwood had to tell him. Maybe the old man wanted to apologize after all these years. Or maybe he expected one from John. Perhaps Hazelwood needed John's advice on a book. The old man would be reluctant to turn to John for assistance, especially after the so-called betrayal, but Hazelwood was getting on in years and might be desperate enough to ask for John's help. Word on campus was that Hazelwood had been living as a recluse for the past few years, rarely venturing from his property. Rumor was that he'd finally given up his search for the mysterious books he'd once dedicated his entire life to finding. John shivered against a sudden chill. Not only was he nervous about the impending reunion, but in his haste to leave the house, he hadn't thought to grab a jacket. Twilight had turned to dusk, and he found his lightweight polo shirt lacking. John pressed the button on the intercom. Almost instantly, Professor Hazelwood's voice sounded from the metal box.
"Is that you, Jonathan?"
John greeted his old mentor, surprised by the pleasantness in Hazelwood's voice. He was unable to detect any of the anger that he'd heard on their last visit.
"Then come on in, old chap,"
the professor said as the gate began to hum and slowly creak open. John took a step forward, then stopped suddenly, stunned by the full view of the professor's lawn and gardens, which had once been meticulously manicured. Now everything was overgrown or dead. Images of southern graveyards came to mind, but even those places had some order to the flora. This looked as if nature had been given free rein to do whatever it liked. Still teetering on the edge of turning around and leaving, John thought of the Beretta 9mm hidden on the top shelf of his closet at home. He'd considered bringing it after he accepted the invitation to visit the man he'd nearly destroyed. But ultimately he told himself he was being paranoid, and he left it locked in the security box. Now, whether or not the old man had been serious, John couldn't ignore the fact that Hazelwood had threatened his life the last time the two had met. The intercom buzzed, and Hazelwood's voice came across.
"The tea is getting cold, Jonathan."
John scanned the grounds for the camera that was allowing the professor to monitor him. He found it hidden halfway up the pine tree to the left of the intercom. Hazelwood had been watching him the whole time. Not willing to look any more ridiculous than he already did, John started up the driveway, the gate closing slowly behind him. There was still beauty in the garden. It just had to be found. A solitary rose blooming amid the thorny brush on the left side of the driveway. A young sapling emerging from the wall of weeds to the right. Good can survive with the bad, and life goes on, John thought. But then he looked to the rotting tomato plants and realized everything comes to an end. The door to the professor's house was just ahead. Now was the time to deal with Hazelwood and see what all this was about. Susan would be fine. The black maple door opened just as John raised his hand to knock. Hazelwood appeared, dressed in a shabby dinner jacket. The yellow crest on the pocket was fraying. So was Hazelwood. Thin wisps of silver hair stuck out in every direction. He was a tiny shell of the man John had studied under nearly 2 decades ago. His back hunched, making him look like a turtle, especially the way his small head, with its beady eyes, poked forward from the collar of his shirt. Hazelwood pushed his glasses up his nose and smiled. "You can put your hand down, Jonathan, unless you mean to strike me." The old man's sly smile and questionable sense of humor worried John. He had betrayed Hazelwood's loyalty when he published The Book of Revelation, Exposing the Truth. He'd gained the man's trust, learned all he could about the sacred and secret tomes, and then wrote a book systematically disproving their existence. In doing so, Hazelwood's life's work was ruined. He'd still had his tenure at the university, but he'd lost all credibility. John hadn't set out to deliberately hurt the old man. He simply saw the fallacy in what Hazelwood espoused. At the time he was researching and writing it, John had told himself that Hazelwood would be dead before his book hit the market. But he'd obviously been mistaken, and the book's publication had crushed Hazelwood. Now the old man was smiling up at John as if nothing bad had happened between them. John lowered his hand and scratched at the scraggly, unkempt beard he'd been meaning to shave for several weeks. "Good to see you, Professor. You look well."
"Thank you, Jonathan. I would say the same, but then you'd know I was lying."
Before John could respond, Hazelwood continued.
"But that is to be expected. I read about Susan's disappearance. Are there any new developments?"
John could only shake his head.
"Oh, that's a shame. I did enjoy her company."
Hazelwood moved out of the doorway and waved John inside.
"I don't want to waste any more of your time than I need to. I heard you're writing another book, and I wouldn't want to impede your progress."
John winced at the dig, then entered the house, and waited while Hazelwood closed the door behind them. John admitted, "I haven't written a single word since she disappeared."
"I'm sorry to hear that."
Hazelwood shuffled down the hallway and motioned for John to follow. He led him into the bookcase-lined study where they used to meet every week to pore over manuscripts and letters from antiquity. Hazelwood pointed John to the seat at the head of a long oak table. John walked behind the chair and studied Hazelwood's emotionless face. "What's this about, if you don't mind my asking?"
"Actually, I do. It's a surprise. Now have a seat while I fetch the tea."
John wanted to protest. The idea of a surprise made him feel ill. But there was no sense in pushing Hazelwood. The old man would talk when he was ready. He'd learned that lesson 1,000 times over the years. Might as well take a seat and relax. A few minutes later, Hazelwood re-entered the study pushing a small bronze cart. After pouring the tea and maneuvering the cart into a corner of the room, Hazelwood said,
"I let go of the help, in case you were wondering."
Instead of saying that he had gathered that much from the garden, John simply nodded and took a sip of the Da Hang Bao tea, a treat which he hadn't had in 5 years. It tasted just as delicious and exotic as he remembered. Hazelwood shuffled to the other side of the table and took a seat opposite John. Looking over the top of his steaming mug, he studied John's face. John waited for as long as he could. "What is it, Arthur?" he asked impatiently, foregoing his usual formalities. I don't have time." Hazelwood held up his hand to quiet John, finished sipping his tea, then set down the mug.
"You'll want to see this."
"I don't see anything," John said, irritated as he looked about the room. John knew he was being rude, but all he wanted to do was leave. Just seeing his mentor's face brought back the feelings of guilt.
"Maybe you can't see what you don't believe."
John pushed away from the table. "I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't have come."
"John, sit,"
Hazelwood said with the same force he used on his more unruly students.
"You don't want to help me?"
I'm sorry. Tell me what you want."
"I want the expert of rare books to verify my greatest find, the one you and I have been discussing since the day we first met."
John perked up, recalling his first visit to Hazelwood's office. John had been a sophomore and was desperately trying to get into Hazelwood's class, Lost Books of the Ancient World. He tried to remember the list Hazelwood had compiled and hung on his office wall. Which one? You haven't found the unedited Taming of the Shrew. Shakespeare had always been Hazelwood's favorite, even though he'd spent the better part of a decade trying to disprove the bard's authorship on classics such as Macbeth. Hazelwood shook his head and got up from the table to take down the painting that hung between the 2 largest bookcases. A safe. He dialed in the combination.
"Even better."
John couldn't begin to think what could be better. Shakespeare's comedies, histories, and tragedies had sold for over $6 million, a dozen times more than John's most lucrative find. If it was much better than that, it explained Hazelwood's friendly disposition and forgiving attitude. Don't tell me it's a Da Vinci. John guessed as Hazelwood opened the safe's door. You won't guess. Hazelwood slipped on a pair of latex gloves he kept in the safe. John leaned forward in his chair but couldn't identify the cover of the thick book Hazelwood extricated from the safe. Its glossy black binding with red letters looked to be something from the latter half of the 20th century. Whatever it was, it couldn't be more than 60 years old, and as far as he knew, nothing of much value had been produced that recently. When he looked at Hazelwood's crooked smile, he wondered if perhaps the old man had lost it. Holding the book so John couldn't see the title, Hazelwood handed him a pair of gloves. Once he had them on, Hazelwood set the book on the placemat before John. Stephen King's The Stand. Complete and uncut. Not even a first edition. And probably only worth the $27 any store would charge for it. If this is a joke, I don't much appreciate it, John said. You said this was something I had to see. How many times have you been told not to judge a book by its cover? Surely you, of all people, should know that. John breathed through his nose, reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his reading glasses. As he slipped them on, he examined the cover, searched for anomalies and imperfections that could raise the value, but he couldn't detect a single one. What exactly am I looking for, Arthur? Hazelwood returned to his seat and took another sip of tea. Open it. Tell me what you see. Exaggerating in order to humor Hazelwood, John lifted the cover with the utmost care. The smell of rotten meat wafted from the title page, and immediately brought tears to his eyes. John turned his head to the side and slammed the book shut. What the hell was that? John wiped the spit from his mouth, realized he could no longer smell the foul stench. All he smelled was the tea. Hazelwood offered his infuriating smile. You tell me, he said, ever the teacher. It smelled like death inside a toilet. That's aptly put, Hazelwood said, almost to himself. So what is it? Instead of answering John, Hazelwood instructed him to open the book again. John steadied his stomach and prepared for the gut-wrenching smell as he opened the cover. But this time there was nothing except the aroma of aged paper. But it... John trailed off helplessly, looking up at Hazelwood for an explanation. Read the details inside the cover. See anything interesting? John wasn't familiar with many of King's works, but he had read this book after the miniseries had come out. Everything, as far as he could tell, seemed to be in order as he scanned the page. Then he came to the copyright date, 19666. His first thought was that someone had accidentally hit the 6 key one too many times. But then he considered the newer-looking cover. How old is King? 60 or so. He wrote this as a teenager? Not quite. The official copyright was 1978. Interesting, John said, not all that impressed by one mistype. How many of these were printed with this date? You're looking at it. Just the one? Hazelwood motioned to the book. Keep going. Annoyed, but more than intrigued, John turned the page and read the dedication aloud. To all my true believers, may your fate be revealed. John looked to Hazelwood and asked, Do you have another copy of this book? As if reading John's mind, Hazelwood recited, For Tabby, this dark chest of wonders. That's the original dedication. The one I'm sure you'd read as a younger man. John didn't want to jump to an irrational and impossible conclusion. He'd needed more proof before he could even acknowledge the question the dedication sparked. He'd heard this dedication countless times, but it had been years since Hazelwood discussed it. To all my true believers, may your fate be revealed. Anything else? John asked, knowing he needed more than a dedication to even begin to entertain what Hazelwood was suggesting. Hazelwood nodded.
If you need more convincing, that is no problem. Be assured, you have the book in front of you.
With one hand ready to turn the page, John said, Professor, you and I both know it doesn't exist. This might meet some of the so-called criteria, but this is not.
All I ask is that you hold your judgment until you've finished the examination.
This is what you want me to believe, isn't it? That this is the book of Revelation? John wasn't referring to the one from the Bible, but the original written a century before the New Testament. Legend said it had been burned over 1,000,000 times, but it couldn't be destroyed. Instead, it found its way into other books, hiding in the pages of lesser works.
That's not what I want you to believe, Hazelwood said. It's what I want you to acknowledge. It's what I want you to verify.
I can't verify a myth.
Yes, you can, and you will. You will verify that this is real, that this is here, and that both you and your book were mistaken.
John started to close the cover, but Hazelwood told him to stop.
What are you afraid of, John? If it's just a hoax, as you claim, then the Book of Revelation doesn't exist. But there's no harm in checking, is there? It seems to me that you would want to do that. Look at it as me giving you another chance to disprove me, to embarrass me once again.
I didn't write my book to embarrass you.
But you did. Now verify my finding, or disprove it.
Hazelwood insisted, staring at John. This wasn't a simple request, and both men knew it. Still, Hazelwood wasn't about to let John walk out the door.
You owe me that.
An unexplainable panic surged through John's body, urging him to run. It had been a mistake to come here, but he was here. The professor deserved his time. Even though John's book had been accurate, he still should have told his mentor what he was publishing. Hazelwood had discovered his pupil's writing the same way as everyone else, in the newspaper. John acquiesced, figuring he could do a quick examination of the book and be done with the whole mess. John looked at the book, then back at Hazelwood. After I prove this is not the book you've been spending your whole life in search of, you'll let me go and I'll owe you nothing?
Let you go? Hazelwood laughed. You're not being held. I'm simply requesting a small favor from an old friend, the preeminent authority on fakes, forgeries, and fables.
John's guilt reached nauseating proportions. Fine, let's do this. He turned past the author's note and browsed over the preface. What else is there? Another typo, an inscription?
Turn to a page in Chapter 1.
John did as he was told. So what am I looking for?
What page are you on?
There was a number 1 in the middle of the footer at the bottom of the left-hand page, but a 5 on the page beside it. John began speed-reading the page, searching for any kind of abnormality. Everything appeared just as he'd read it in his dog-eared copy, when suddenly, across the page, 5 non-consecutive words transformed from black to bright red. The words then made their way toward the header. John mumbled his disbelief.
Yes?
Hazelwood said giddily. What is this? John asked. But before Hazelwood answered, John looked at the old man and said, Okay, nice trick. Okay, well done. How did you manage that?
I didn't do anything.
The ink turns color when the air hits it, or is it the temperature change?
Hazelwood smiled. It's no trick. What does it say?
Reluctantly, John read the highlighted words to himself. Respect, don't, him, you. Always quick with puzzles, he rearranged the order of the words. You don't respect him. Instead of telling Hazelwood this, though, he shook his head and said, I'm surprised you'd sink that low.
There's no deception. I have no idea what it reads.
Then I'm even sadder, because either you've been duped this easily or you think I'm an idiot. Hazelwood didn't seem bothered by John's disbelief.
Try another page.
Which one?
Your choice.
Figuring Hazelwood would direct him to specific doctored pages, John was surprised to be given a choice, but only slightly. Don't tell me you fixed every page. This had to cost some money.
Not to mention the amount of time it would take to do what you're suggesting I did.
Hazelwood made a good point. But it only made the situation more pathetic. Any page, right?
Anyone you choose. Be my guest.
John flipped through a few dozen pages before stopping. Hazelwood asked him what number he'd landed on. John said, It should read 47, but there's only a 2. A mistake, but not a very revealing one.
It's no mistake. You don't see anything else?
John adjusted his eyes. Seemingly random words slowly turned from black to red, then moved to the top of the page. Back is coming, she not. It didn't take John long to rearrange them. She is not coming back. John fought to keep from grabbing the heartless bastard by the throat. Gritting his teeth and staring at the man, he said, This is no longer funny.
I agree. It isn't. Recognize what you have in front of you. Or are you truly blind?
John's hands couldn't stop shaking. Even after what had happened because of his book, John was unable to believe the man would cross the line and bring Susan into the hoax.
If you recall, you stopped at that page. I didn't direct you to it. Please tell me what it reads.
His voice seemed to be truly interested, not a trace of malice. Hazelwood had never been a good bluff, so John started to wonder if maybe he wasn't trying to pull off some sinister prank. It says she's not coming back.
Do you think it means Susan, or might there be someone else?
There's only Susan. John remembered that they were talking about their honeymoon plans the morning before she'd vanished. He'd finally given in and told her that they could go to Fiji like she wanted. But it doesn't matter what appears, because either you or one of your friends put this here.
You suppose it's luck that you turned to that exact page?
John motioned toward the book. It's probably on every page.
Oh, I assure you, it isn't.
So you admit you know what's on the pages?
What I admit is the book of Revelation is able to draw the chosen to it. It must be calling to you. Do you feel its pull at the back of your mind?
John wanted to tell the old kook he was out of his head, that he should be locked up in an asylum. But there was a tug, one that made him want to turn the page. He shook his head to clear his thoughts, upset that he had been so gullible as to consider Hazelwood's suggestion. There was no pull, it was just a book.
Why don't you try another?
Hazelwood asked.
Afraid of what you might find?
This doesn't prove a thing. You are worse than one of those TV psychics. These revelations could apply to anyone.
Turn to another page. I won't take much more of your time.
John flipped through the book. and stopped a few pages into chapter 42. Even though he was more than a third of the way through the thick book, the page number in the footer was only 3, and the one next to it was 389. If the next page he turns to was 4, then he at least had to consider the possibility of the book's legitimacy. He could not think of any way Hazelwood might have rigged the pagination.
"What page are you on?"
Hazelwood asked. "Your guess is as good as mine."
"What does the number say?"
"Come on, how'd you do it?"
"Do you remember what I taught you?"
John flashed through the years of information he'd gathered through their chats, many taking place right here in this room. He tried to remember anything concerning the book and pages. Something clicked. There were some who said the book would only give 4 revelations a day, each numbered accordingly. He pushed this realization from his thoughts and examined the red words on the page. This one was too simple. Scared, is, use, to, he, pistol, the. John had completely forgotten about the nickel-plated Derringer that Hazelwood had kept on his desk. It was 100 years old and always under glass, but Hazelwood had claimed it still worked.
"Anything interesting, John?"
John shook his head and continued to stare at the book, trying to collect himself. As he stared at the blood-red words, an internal alarm sounded, his logic and rationality struggling to hold precedence. But it was a losing battle. The book kept calling him, warning him to beware, to stop the crazy old man before it was too late.
"John, I need to know. It looks as if you found something of interest."
John picked up his mug and drank as he observed the professor. He hadn't noticed it before, but there was a small bulge under Hazelwood's jacket on the left side of his chest. It was probably just a notepad or a handkerchief, but John supposed it was large enough to be the Derringer. In an attempt to distract the old man, John asked Hazelwood if he would mind getting him some more tea. The man answered that he would be glad to. Hazelwood got up from the table with his eerie smile and turned his back to retrieve the teapot. John looked around for the weapon. On the remote chance that Hazelwood was carrying a concealed gun, John needed something. Hazelwood was old and slow. He couldn't forget that the feeble man coming back with the tea had threatened to kill him the last time they met. Hazelwood seemed very definite on that subject. As Hazelwood poured John's tea, making a point not to look at the book, John leaned forward, trying to peek inside his mentor's frayed jacket. He couldn't tell what was inside. Then Hazelwood returned the pot to its cart. The old man's wife had died shortly after the release of John's book. It wouldn't be surprising if the professor had blamed John for her death as well. A devastating loss could change a man and make him do things he wouldn't have considered before. Now that Susan was gone, John knew this to be very true. Before today, he rarely entertained violent thoughts. But inside this study, he was dreaming of strangling the demented son of a bitch sitting across from him.
"You're not going to drink it?"
I was just letting it cool." John picked up his mug and brought it to his lips, wondering if the tea could be poisoned. Could that be what was causing the violent thoughts, making him consider the book to be real? Actually, I think it needs another moment. He set the mug in front of him. Hazelwood shrugged and drank from his own cup, the same tea that was in John's mug. Or was it?
"What do you say to opening up one last page? I promise it'll be the last one."
"But it only gives 4 a day, right? Are you sure we should rush to the end?" John's eyes drifted to the cart and the small butter knife. He wondered if he could reach it before the old man drew.
4 per person, yes,"
Hazelwood said. "So maybe we should do yours next."
"Not necessary. I just need you to verify that it is the book. I take it that you're still not convinced."
"That it is the Book of Revelation? You told me yourself that it only gives revelations to one who has killed another. I've never harmed a soul in my life."
Physically, maybe, Hazelwood said, the overwhelming sadness in his voice hanging over the room. Feeling he had the man on the ropes, John said, "At least tell me how you did it." "Turn to a new page, and I promise to explain everything." John agreed and flipped further into the book. He stopped and stared at the 4 in the footer that should have read 932. Hazelwood stood and said, "If the book is not real, then how to explain this?" "What?" John asked, distracted as he studied the letters changing color in front of him. Going, he's, kill, to, you. "Will you agree that the book is real if the revelations prove to be true?" John looked up from the book in time to see Hazelwood reach for the object inside of his jacket. Before the old man could pull out a gun, John shoved the table into Hazelwood's chest. John, now on his feet, came charging and grabbed the old man. Hazelwood caught his breath, motioned the hand underneath his jacket. "What do you think I have in here?" "Don't move." "Well, this isn't going to be very fun. I have something to show you." "Don't move," John repeated. "You're acting like I'm going to kill someone." "Are you?" "I'm not going to kill anyone." Hazelwood grinned. "Not anyone else," he said. "Anyone else? What are you talking about?" "Don't worry, John. I won't hurt you." "Shut up and slowly bring your hand out from the jacket." "I had to do it, Jonathan," Hazelwood said, without making a move to withdraw his hand. "Shut up!" John screamed, pulling Hazelwood's hand away before reaching in himself. "I wasn't an evil man, I swear it. They say you have to be evil to get it to work. They say the book calls you if you look long enough." Hazelwood tried to reach in his jacket. "Stop!" John shouted. "Leave your hand where it is." "But it's the proof you need in order to believe. Go ahead. Take it." John felt something in his hand. Not a gun, but an envelope. It was black. Hazelwood let out a raspy sigh and licked his lips. "You'll want to see this." John simply stared at the professor. Then his eyes moved to the envelope. The old man's fingers pushed it on John. "Open it. I offer your proof." John tore it open. "Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for coming tonight. For heeding the call." John hesitated, wondered what could be inside the black envelope. Slowly he tipped it to the side and caught the necklace sliding out. He didn't need to see the engraving on the locket to know whose neck it had adorned. Another small object dropped to the floor and bounced off his shoe. Susan's 2-carat engagement ring. John turned on the professor, ready to grab him by the neck and squeeze. "In the envelope, Jonathan, look," Hazelwood whispered. He let the necklace fall from his hand and peered inside. There was a folded Polaroid. It had caused the lump under Hazelwood's jacket. Hazelwood struggled to keep his eyes open. "Go on, Jonathan. Go ahead and look inside." John pulled out the photo, the envelope fluttering to the ground. "I do thank you, Jonathan. Taking her enabled me to find this book, and soon you'll take its burden from me." Hazelwood took a ragged breath. "Tell me, Jonathan, when did you know where she was? Was it before or after you walked into my house?" That smell. Susan's perfume. He'd been paying too much attention to Hazelwood to realize that it was his fiancée's. The blood-red words. Hazelwood had caused her death. John turned the photo over in his fingers, unable to open it and look at the image inside. I did what I had to do, Jonathan. Isn't that what you once taught me?
John unfolded the photo. Susan lay on her back, her eyes open. There was a hole a few inches above her right eye. Blood pooled beneath her beautiful blonde hair splayed on the hardwood floor, the same floor he was standing on. Shaking, his mind numb, John reached out and wrapped his finger around his mentor's throat and squeezed. Felt his thumbs denting the larynx, the fleshy tissue stretching under the pressure as Hazelwood's breaths turned wet. John's eyes stayed locked on the old man's face as Hazelwood's fingers clawed at his wrists. He lowered the old man to the floor and continued to squeeze until he felt his fingers tingle. The life finally left his old friend's eyes, and John turned to the book, which had fallen to the floor. Page 166 was now numbered 1. The words changed color before his eyes. Her, goodbye, tell, run. The words made chillingly perfect sense. This truly was the Book of Revelation. John walked out of the room and saw his love's body curled up under a table. He fell to his knees and kissed her cold hand. He said his goodbyes and stifled his sobs. He sat there for hours until his legs fell asleep. Then he lay down next to her and recalled the final word. Run.